Welcome back. After the break, you're watching Indus News, and I'm Fiza Jamal, bringing you our main stories in detail. We start from Doha, where delegates representing the Taliban and Kabul have pledged to follow a roadmap for peace based on a monitored peace process. U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says peace talks with the Taliban will resume today after a pause for the talks. In a joint statement after the first intra-Afghan dialogue in Doha, Taliban and Kabul delegates agreed to reduce violence in Afghanistan. The statement includes a commitment to a monitored peace process, the return of internally displaced people, and regional non-interference in Afghanistan. U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad expressed satisfaction that the participants for finding a common ground. He said the dialogue gives hope for an end to the 40-year war. Around 70 delegates took part in the two-day dialogue. For more on these developments, we are joined by Kabul-based Afghan affairs expert, Mr. Hamdallah Hamdard. Thank you for giving us your time, Mr. Hamdard. So as you know, both the Afghan government and Taliban have agreed to reduce violence in Afghanistan and to follow a roadmap for peace. How has the progress at the intra-Afghan talks in Doha been received at home?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. We Afghans here in Afghanistan are hopeful for the current peace talks going on in Doha, Qatar, between the Taliban and the Afghan delegation. However, the war or the violence has not reduced yet. We witnessed very barbaric and fatal explosions both in Kabul, in Ghazni, and then there were some bombardment in Maidan Wardak province by the government and by the NATO forces as well. So both sides are continuing the war, and at the same time they're talking with each other in Doha. We hope, and definitely the nation hopes that Taliban and the government both will also reduce the violence against each other. Especially they will focus on reducing the civilian casualties, which is increasing day by day in the war. So far, there is nothing that can be felt here in Afghanistan, but we are hopeful. The progress that has been made between the two sides during the intra-Afghan peace talks in Doha, that is something that makes us hopeful towards sealing a peace deal between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and that will be monitored by the international community, especially the US and the neighboring countries.
And Mr. Hamdard, what about the Afghans? Are they convinced by the Taliban's promises to respect people's rights, especially those of women?
Well, as long as they do not implement it practically, we cannot trust anybody. But as we are going towards the peace deal, we want to be more flexible, and we can put a trust on them at the moment. However, their past experience and even their current experience in the provinces which are dominated by them, women are not allowed to go to schools, and they are not allowed to practice and entertain their basic rights where they are governed by the Taliban. However, we hope that once they join the Afghan government and they agree on a peace deal, the women's right will be preserved and the minorities' right will be preserved as well. And beside that, we will have our civil rights, and we definitely look forward to Taliban's acceptance of the civil rights for all the Afghans. The civil rights that are given to us by the Sharia, and also the civil rights that is practiced in all Islamic countries.
And finally, Mr. Hamdard, peace talks between the Taliban and the US have already resumed today. How close do you think they are to striking a deal?
Well, Taliban have almost agreed with the US regarding the US forces withdrawal from Afghanistan. They have almost agreed on that. The final declaration will be issued sooner, after a couple of days. However, the Taliban, with the Afghan delegation and even with the US, still have not agreed on a ceasefire, which is very necessary for the Afghan nation and for the people here who are victims of this Taliban government and Taliban and US war in Afghanistan. We also look forward to Taliban and US sealing a deal on the ceasefire as well. Of course, the US government is trying to seal a political deal with the Taliban and the Afghan government before September 2019. In September, we will have the presidential polls, presidential elections in Afghanistan, and they will definitely be trying to reach at least the preliminary agreements on this kind of issues such as ceasefire, the government type, and the withdrawal of the international forces from Afghanistan. And the issues that they also discussed with the Afghan delegation, there were some minor issues, not minor, but not the issues regarding the war. They were the rights of minorities, the women's rights, the children's rights, and these things. So we hope that Taliban will reach an agreement with the US first regarding the withdrawal of the international forces, and then they will agree with the Afghan government to sign the peace deal and finally put their guns down and live their civil life with all the Afghans together.
Thank you for giving us your time and insight, Mr. Hamdard. That was a Kabul-based Afghan affairs expert, Mr. Hamdallah Hamdard, joining us. Moving on, Yemen's Houthi rebels have called for the complete withdrawal of military coalition forces from the country. This comes after UAE said it's reducing the number of troops it's deploying in war-torn Yemen. A UAE official says Abu Dhabi is turning from a military strategy to a peace plan. He says the UAE will remain committed to the internationally recognized government of President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi. A spokesman for the Saudi-led coalition says both the UAE and Saudi Arabia are committed to their goals in Yemen. China has told the U.S. to withdraw a potential multi-billion-dollar arms sale to Taiwan, saying it violates the One China principle. The U.S. has approved a $2.2 billion weapons deal in a move bound to anger China. More in this report.
The deal includes over 100 tanks and 250 Stinger missiles. During a media briefing, China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Gang Shuang says Beijing strongly opposes the action.
It is a crude interference in China's internal affairs and harms China's sovereignty and security interests. China is strongly dissatisfied and firmly opposed to this and has already made 10 representations to the U.S. side.
The U.S. Congress has been notified about the arms deal and has 30 days to object. The transaction goes against Beijing's One China policy because it sees Taiwan as a renegade province.
And Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam says an extradition bill that sparked mass protests is dead. Lam has not completely withdrawn the proposed legislation on moving suspects to mainland China. Protesters promised new rallies demanding a complete withdrawal of the controversial bill. Addressing a press conference, Lam admitted there are lingering doubts about the legislation. Carrie Lam said she would hold an open dialogue with the youth of Hong Kong. 23 U.S. governors have joined California in opposing U.S. President Donald Trump's plans to relax vehicle mileage standards. Trump plans to roll back tough fuel economy standards imposed by former President Barack Obama. These measures were aimed at greening the U.S. transportation sector, which accounts for 1/3 of carbon dioxide emissions. Trump has backtracked on many policies the Obama administration put in place to fight global warming. Trump withdrew U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord in June 2017. He has called the accord unfair, ineffective, and very expensive. The UN nuclear agency has confirmed that Iran has begun enriching uranium beyond a limit set by the 2015 nuclear deal. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence says Washington doesn't want war with Iran, but is ready to protect its interests. offering to talk to Tehran on nuclear program. Pence says Iran should not confuse American restraint with a lack of resolve. He says the 2015 nuclear deal was disastrous and there will be no more pallets of cash for Iran. Iran says world powers will not negotiate a better deal than the 2015 nuclear accord. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says global powers must uphold their commitments under the deal if they want Tehran to return to the agreement. OPEC has called for a quick resolution of tensions among Venezuela, Iran and the US. In an interview, OPEC Secretary General Mohammed Barkindo said the world needs peace and stability to ensure growth and development. He said Iran and Venezuela will remain exempted from OPEC production quotas. 2 Turkish soldiers have been killed in a Kurdish militant attack in the country's southern Hakkari province. The defense ministry says the attack was carried out from a distance. 1 soldier has been wounded in the attack by PKK militants. The nature of the attack is not yet clear. The PKK is listed as a terrorist organization by Turkey, the US, and the EU. And the European Union has expressed grave concern over Turkey's deployment of a second ship to drill for natural gas off the coast of Cyprus. It says the operation off northeast Cyprus is an unacceptable escalation, violating Cypriot sovereignty. EU's top diplomat Federica Mogherini says the European Council is considering appropriate measures against Turkey. Cyprus has been divided since Turkish forces intervened in 1974 to prevent a union with Greece and protect the ethnic Turkish minority. Tensions flared last month between Ankara and Nicosia after a Turkish ship dropped anchor near the Mediterranean island to drill for gas. Turkey disputes the right of the Cypriot government to exploit gas reserves and sent the ships to reinforce its claim. Turkish police have begun nationwide raids to arrest over 200 military personnel. The officials said suspects have ties with the group blamed for the 2016 coup attempt. Prosecutors say that they issued arrest warrants for 228 suspects, including a colonel, 5 majors, and 100 lieutenants. They said the suspects have alleged links to Muslim preacher Fethullah Gulen's movement. South Korea says it will begin hiking tours on a trail in the demilitarized zone, one of the world's most heavily fortified borders. The DMZ is about 250 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide. South Korean authorities say group tours near the eastern coastal town of Goseong are expected to begin on July the 23rd. Up to 40 people will be allowed per trip. The tour will include a visit to a museum on the DMZ. The project is part of South Korea's attempts to improve inter-Korean peace and stability in the peninsula. The announcement comes after US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met in the DMZ on June the 30th. Serbia has accused Kosovo and Albania of coordinating foreign policies to create a joint state in the Balkans. Both countries have simultaneously boycotted a regional conference taking place in Bosnia. Serbia's Foreign Minister Ivica Dačić says the boycott of the summit is part of a strategy to create a greater Albania. He says Kosovo and Albania have created serious problems by not attending the Southeast European Cooperation Process Summit. The EU has told all parties that good neighborly relations are one of the key preconditions for Balkan countries to move to accession. Kosovo says it refused to attend the summit in Sarajevo because it wasn't invited as a sovereign country. Albanian Foreign Minister Cenk Sakac said Tirana pulled out of the event in solidarity with Kosovo. while in Albania, thousands of opposition supporters have resumed protests calling on Prime Minister Edi Rama to step down. They say the country's accession to the EU may be blocked if there is no change at the top. Demonstrators in Tirana called for Rama's resignation over corruption and electoral fraud allegations. Rama, who won a second term in 2017, has dismissed all concerns about the election results. The opposition says Rama could jeopardize Albania's accession to the European Union. EU member states are due to make a decision later this year. The EU has announced a €72 million financial assistance package for Central Asian states. The program is part of the EU's new Central Asia strategy announced earlier this month. EU Commission Vice President Federica Mogherini presented the plan at a Central Asia ministerial meeting in Bishkek. It will support regional trade, counterterrorism, sustainable energy, and economic empowerment. 5 former Soviet republics and Afghanistan are the beneficiaries of the plan. The EU and its members are on track to provide over €1 billion in assistance to Central Asia over the period of 2014 to 2020. Spain has joined Italy in criminalizing migrant rescue by threatening the NGO Open Arms with $1 million fine. The Spanish charity saves migrants in danger of drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. Spain's Merchant Marine Chief Benito Núñez Quintanilla warned the NGO it's not authorized to conduct rescues in the southern Mediterranean. In the event of a violation, he said the offending ship will be sent to a Spanish port and immobilized. Open Arms operates between Libya and southern Europe, aiding migrants who face danger while crossing from North Africa. This comes after Italy arrested Sea-Watch's Carola Rackete last month for bringing rescued migrants ashore. Over 600 people, mostly migrants fleeing war and poverty, have died in the Mediterranean this year. Earlier today, Italian Coast Guard rescued 47 migrants from a boat in the Mediterranean, taking them to the southern Sicilian port of Pozzaio. In Venezuela, newspapers are going digital to survive an economic slowdown, but online papers are facing problems too, with frequent power outages and low internet access. Details here.
International Monetary Fund analysts estimate inflation in Venezuela will hit 10 million % this year. Most of the country's citizens are struggling to meet their daily needs. Even newspapers have become a luxury. Most newspaper sellers are unable to sell even 10 papers a day.
I used to sell 80 newspapers a day. Now the situation is so bad, I can hardly sell 3 or 4.
With the economy in shambles and hardly anyone buying papers, media houses no longer have the funds for printing.
We wish to keep reflecting the reality of this country. We want to keep the people informed. It is frustrating that we have been forced to do so only through digital means, because we know it will not have the same impact.
Journalists say it is not just the recent economic crisis which is to blame. In 2013, the state created a company to control newsprint. 58 newspapers have closed down since then.
El Nacional was aggravated in time, but because it was targeted as it was critical of the government attacked it from other sides. He attacked it economically, he attacked it with censorship. I have a prohibition on the National Telecommunications Commission. One of the provisions that I have from the Commission is that I cannot report anything that generates anxiety.
With no end in sight, the country may soon have no free press at all.
Lazarus Chigwandali, a street musician in southeastern African country of Malawi, has become the voice of albinos. Chigwandali is 39 years old and has been playing upbeat tunes on the streets of Malawi's capital, Lilongwe, for years. Details here.
Albinos are often persecuted in Malawi and other southern African countries. Their body organs are often harvested and used for witchcraft. But Chigwandali has defied the odds and reached international fame as a musician.
While in the US, I had the opportunity to perform at Times Square, which is a very prestigious place. Many musicians have never had a chance to perform there. I felt honored that after playing at City Mall here in Malawi, I could also perform at Times Square in the US.
Chigwandali is soon to release a professional album and is also starring in a documentary produced by Madonna. The musician sings in local Chichewa language while playing a homemade banjo and drums.
We want Lazarus' name to be up there in the fighting for persons and the rights of everyone with albinism, so whether in Malawi, in Uganda, in Tanzania, wherever.
Chigwandali hopes to represent people with albinism and bring attention to the plight they face in Africa.
Whimsical and cleverly decorated sculptures of hay and straw have been put on display in France. The massive artworks have been created at France's annual contest for sculptures in French Alps. More in this report.
France's unique sculpture contest is nothing less than a challenge for the artists. The sculptors have a free choice of theme, but they have to create monumental sculptures filled and covered with straw and hay. 12 sculptors from around the world have to accomplish the task in just 5 days.
The sculptors who make sculptures have several skills for their art because they have to understand the resistance of the materials, work with the blueprints and master all of that, especially the hay and straw. They are materials which are very flexible.
Chameleon, a giant lizard constructed by a Lithuanian team, won the jury and youth audience prize. Russian's team sculpture titled The Power of the Subconscious grabbed the second spot. In the circles from a Czech team clinched the bronze medal.
You have to have improvisation and adaptation. You are given the necessary materials to make what you want, and all of the artists here are great people. And me, working here at Valor, it's my life story.
Each sculptor was given 600 kilos of hay and 400 kilograms of straw to create the massive artworks. They will remain on display throughout the summer.
Now let's take you to the world of business, where US has announced fresh duties on some Mexican and Chinese steel goods, alleging unfair subsidies for manufacturers. The US Commerce Department says imported steel used in construction benefits from subsidies in China, Mexico and Canada. It says the subsidies are negligible in Canada's case, so no retaliatory duties have been imposed. The action is in response to a grievance lodged in February by U.S. steel producers. U.S. customs agents will begin collecting import duties based on the subsidy rates, but the funds could be returned if officials reverse the findings. European stock markets are down across the board in early trading after a bad day in Asia. Germany's DAX index has fallen nearly 1.5%. Paris and London have also lost ground. Earlier in the day, Asian stocks fell to their lowest levels in 2.5 weeks after hopes dwindled for a U.S. interest rate cut. Mainland Chinese shares slipped significantly, as did Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index. Australia's ASX 200 and South Korea's Kospi indices also declined. Japan's Nikkei 225 recovered marginally after slipping in early trade. The dollar traded at a 3-week high. These are all the main stories in detail we have for you this hour. You can follow up on all of our main stories. You'll find them online at indus.news.